Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Good morning, everyone. So this hearing session is now open. It forms part of the examination of the Reading Borough Local Plan Partial Update. My name is Ms. Joanna Gilbert, and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct this examination and to report to the Council in due course. The hearing today will be a structured discussion which I shall lead based on the agenda which has been previously distributed and is on the website. The purpose of the hearing is to enable people around the virtual table to put their points of view and to help me to get the information that I need. Just before starting discussion today, there's some formalities which I'll need to complete. So first of all, can I just start with introductions? And as we've got some new participants today, I think it's worth going around everybody again. So just for everybody's reference, the programme officer is Jane Greenway, and you'll have seen her contact details on various documents which have already been issued and the examination website, and she's the first point of contact if any assistance is needed. In terms of the council officers, can I ask the council to introduce who's in the hearing for the council today? And I'll turn to Mr. Warringham first of all, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Mark Warringham. I'm Planning Policy Manager at the Council and I've led on the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Burr?
Hi, I'm Sarah Burr. I'm a Senior Planning Policy Officer and I've been helping with the local plan as well.
Thank you. And do you have anybody from ORS here today?
We do, yes. Nigel.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Nigel Moore from Opinion Research Services. I'm Head of Housing Assessments and I'm here to help with the discussion on housing need.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Good morning. Okay, and in terms of other participants today, obviously I would normally go around a table. It's a bit more difficult virtually, but if I can just ask you, I'll just mention your name and if you can just introduce yourself and who you're representing, and we'll make a start with Megan Streets, please.
Hi, I'm Megan Streets. I'm Planning Manager at Gladman and I'm representing Gladman Developments.
And you'll be talking to Mr. Dutton's statement that was provided?
Yes, I will be, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Streets. Okay, and we have Bethan Haynes.
Good morning. Can you see and hear me okay?
I can hear you, but can't see you at the moment. And now I can't hear you either. Perhaps, Ms. Haynes, if you could try leaving and coming back in and see how we go. We had this problem in preparation, didn't we? And Ms. Haynes could hear us, but she couldn't respond. Okay. And we should have Mr. Berendt as well with us this morning, and I think I've seen his name, but he appears to have disappeared. Is that correct, Ms. Burr?
Yes, I think he probably unintentionally left the meeting.
Okay. Ms. Haynes, any success?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay, sorry, I've my computer is completely frozen, but I have joined on my phone, so I'm just going to mute and unmute myself and listen that way, if that's okay.
Well, we're also having an issue because Mr. Berendt has left or has not managed to make it into the call. So can I suggest that you do a hard restart on your computer?
Yes,
and we give it a few minutes.
I will do that. It seems to be a problem with my camera. So if I rejoin on my laptop, I might just join so you can hear me rather than see me, because when I turn the camera on, it seems to crash the computer. So
okay.
I'll try again and I'll be with you in a few minutes.
We'll give it a go. Okay, thank you very much. No worries. would it be possible, Jane, could you email Mr. Berent and just check in with him and see if he's okay? Apologies for this, the joys of virtual working.
Jane, I think you're on mute. Jane, can you hear me?
Sorry, we can't hear you, Jane.
Hello, can you hear me
Hi.
now?
Yes.
Oh, hello. Sorry. He's just emailed to say his audio and camera aren't working, and he's going to log off and on again now and see what happens. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I
It's all
muted
right.
myself.
Thank you.
I'll email him back and say we have acknowledged that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had a virtual inquiry a while ago where we lost barristers. That was quite frustrating as well. So can't do much without the participants. Can I just check whilst we're waiting whether people in the call can use the hands up function today? We had a little issue yesterday in being unable to use hands up. So if you can give it a try.
I don't see it on my options, and I tinkered with the settings for the meeting behind the scenes and it was no longer available. So sometimes they add and remove features over time. I have to do a manual hands up again today.
Okay, so it will be a manual hands up, and for those who are having problems with their video, it will be interjecting verbally.
Good morning, Inspector. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I can hear
Hello.
you. My option to turn my camera on is completely greyed out, so it's obviously turned itself off, but I am here.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course, thank you. So I'm Bethan Haynes. I'm an Associate Director at Lichfields, and I'm here on behalf of USS Limited. It was my colleague Nick Kirby yesterday for the same sites and the same client.
Yeah. And you're speaking to Mr. Kirby's statement?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for confirming that. Okay, and it appears we also have Mr. Berent in the call. Hello, good morning. Are you able to hear us, Mr. Berent? If you can, could you try turning your mute off?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Sorry,
I can hear you, Mr. Berent.
I'm having to come from my phone. For some reason, my camera on my computer is not working, so apologies. Sorry, Mark Berent from the Home Builders Federation.
Hello. And are you happy with staying on your phone?
I'll have to. I will keep it. Can you see me as well? I can't see myself. Okay, so that's all working. I'll work from this and see how we go. But thank you for your patience.
No worries. You weren't the only one.
Okay, thank you.
And it does happen. So just in terms of all the participants today, we were just talking whilst Mr. Berent and Ms. Haynes were trying to join again. In terms of if you want to speak, what I will do after I've asked a question, I'll generally go to the council first of all, then I'll ask whether anybody else wants to participate and ask any further questions. We do not appear to have the hands up function. So for those who I can see, if you can actually put your hands up physically, as I am currently doing, and if you are operating without video, so this may be the case for Mr. Berent and Ms. Haynes, if you can just interject verbally, I will come back to you because I appreciate you may want to speak. Okay, and we'll do the best we can with that. Just in terms of housekeeping, Unless you're using the mobile phone to enter the call today, please can you make sure all mobile phones are turned off or switched to silent. Just in terms of taking breaks, I will look at taking a break during the hearing sessions, but the gaps between breaks will vary and it will really depend on how discussion is going. In terms of documents, just to confirm, the plan under examination is the Reading Borough Local Plan Partial Update, the LPPU. And prior to submission of the plan for examination, Regulation 19 consultation took place. I have those representations before me and I will take them into account. There's a guidance note which I previously produced, EX011, and I've also identified matters, issues and questions, EX010. I've got hearing statements from the council and from others as provided on the examination webpage. And just for confirmation, the council has also published the Reading Borough Local Plan Partial Update list of changes to submission draft, that's LP002, and that accompanied the submission of the LPPU. But these changes have not been subject to public consultation or sustainability appraisal, and I've already advised the council that I'm tasked with examining the plan as submitted. So if they do wish to make modifications that are included within that list, they will need to put them forward and explain why they are necessary. So just to confirm that in terms of my consideration of the soundness of the LPPU, I will be considering that against the criteria in the National Planning Policy Framework published on the 19th of December 2023 and whether it's legally compliant. But in submitting the LPPU, the council considers that it's sound, and this is the starting point for the examination. So if you are making a challenge to the soundness of the LPPU, then please explain why and what changes would be necessary to make it sound. And we've already discussed, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Just like to confirm it's open to the council to propose further changes to the plan. I've asked that they keep a record of any possible changes that arise during the hearings. I issued an action list to the council with a number of documents and changes that should be made, and I will go through those with the council at the end of the session today. And any main modifications should be the subject of future consultation. And just to confirm that the examination remains open until my report's submitted to the council. No further representations or evidence will be accepted after the hearing sessions are finished unless I specifically request otherwise. And at the end of the hearing sessions, I will look to indicate the likely timescales of the next phases of the examination. That may be in writing. Can I just check before we go on to dealing with matter 2, which is housing need and requirement, whether anybody has any questions at this stage about procedural matters, please? No, thank you. Okay, so in terms of matter 2, housing need and requirement, thank you to everybody who's provided hearing statements going through the matters in detail. You'll have seen the agenda that I sent out has a number of figures to be referred to during the hearing. And those figures are taken from evidence-based documents provided by the council and the council's matter 2 statement. And that's that list of numbers is intended to help everyone, just to confirm that we're discussing the same issues. So can I just start first of all, in terms of the standard method, Mr. Warringham, what standard method figure should I be considering in this particular instance here, please?
So according to our calculations, which are kind of all set out in the housing provision background paper addendum, which is EX013,
yeah,
it's 822 per year.
And that is the figure that was extant at the point of submission of the plan, rather than the figure that was extant at the point of consultation on Regulation 19. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the figure as of the publication of the new affordability ratios in March this year.
Okay, thank you. And does anybody want to follow up on that particular point, just in terms of that 822 figure? No? Okay. So can I just check with the council then, Mr. Warringham?
It was just there is an anomaly in some of the hearing statements, in that I think the Home Builders Federation have calculated it differently to 827, which is, I know it's not a big gap, but it's a fairly critical gap, because our provision figure falls right in the middle of it. So I haven't been able to replicate that figure, and I'm not sure what the reason for the difference is. So
okay.
Well, yes. I
Mr.
can explain that. Sorry, that was my my error in terms of that. In terms of the it wasn't. I forgot to move it on from 24 to 34 within the thing. It should have been 25 to 35, and it was just a pure error on my behalf in that sense. And I've redone the figures, and I get 822 as well. So I'm in conformity with what the council is saying.
Okay. Does that help, Mr. Warringham?
That's perfect, thank you.
Okay, and just to confirm, I also went over the figures. I didn't try everything to replicate Mr. Barrett's figure, but I came out with 822 as well. Okay, so can I just ask the council, bearing in mind that standard method figure of 822, is the council now following that standard method figure, or is there preference to remain with the ORS derived need figure of 735 per annum? Mr. Warringham.
We're sticking with our position, because as far as we're concerned, having identified exceptional circumstances, that those don't change as a result of the publication of new data, which I think the same would be true in terms of the statements made in the housing need assessment.
Thank you. And does anybody want to come in on that particular point? No? Okay. So Mr. Moore, could you just take me through how ORS reached the point that they did in the housing needs assessment, please?
Yes, it's covered in the council's method statement at in response to question 2.2 is where they've covered this within their method statement. Mm-hmm. Sorry, within their submission to you.
The hearing statement.
The hearing statement, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
And the process was basically to take the bigger picture on this. The question was, were there any issues within the data within Reading? And what would be the need if we went through this process in a different consideration? So we looked at the demographic situation in Reading, and there were particular issues with unattributable population change, which we felt was appropriate to adjust. And then we looked at this as what would be the need if we considered it through processes away from just following immediately from the standard method. So we looked at what the household growth would be, and then adjusted that in light of, I'm trying to find the exact table within the submission here, because Mr. Warringham has very usefully provided this. It's on page 6 of the hearing statement. So we looked at this.
This is figure 1.
This is figure 1. So yeah, we looked at what the population growth would be, what the household projections are showing for Reading, adjusted this in light of the census and mid-year population estimates that were available at the time we did this, applied a vacancy rate, added anyone who was in communal housing who required to be added, which had added some additional numbers, added concealed families, because there are often families who do not appear in the household projections, but require to be added somewhere within these studies. Then added and adjusted for suppressed household formation to take formation rates back to 2001 levels, so that we didn't build in suppressed household formations to this. That got us to a need of 562 per annum. We then compared that to the jobs target, and that was insufficient to meet the jobs target. So that required another 173 dwellings per annum to take you to 735. And that was a balance between the demographic growth, meeting all of the needs within Reading, and also balancing against the jobs growth. And in part, this was seeking to future-proof the study as well, because obviously the date on the report is July 2024. It was written just before that. It was clear at the time we were writing this that there was an election coming. We didn't know which way standard method was going to change, how policy was going to change. Clearly, one option was just to take the standard method and take it forwards, but an option also to consider what the policy, what the actual housing needs of Reading were, and that's what we considered within our study. So we got it to be 735 per annum to balance jobs and workers and meet all of the needs based on trend population growth and adjusting for suppressed household formation and concealed households.
Thank you. So just to follow up on that, so I think the question's been asked by USS, and Ms. Haynes might want to come in on this. But so you took a different starting point with the 2018 population projections, and I understand, you know, you've set out reasons why you've done that. But I think USS asked, why didn't the council opt for a 2014 based adjusted figure and then use the further steps in the standard method after that?
It was an option. We, as a modelling, have always worked at the time we're working to 2018 for affordable housing and for all our other housing needs, and then adjusting those numbers to balance against the standard method. So we would always take the most recent data as our starting point, and then work forward from that, while ensuring that we pick up suppressed household formation, that we pick up concealed households. So if we'd have begun with an adjusted 2014, the demographic starting point would have been higher, but the other adjustments later would have been lower because it would have had more household formations already built into this. But once you start changing the standard method, it's necessary to kind of open up all the stages we felt at the time. You know, it's an appropriate stage on this standard method. Mr. Warringham wants to speak.
Yeah, Mr. Warringham.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, my reading of the National Planning Policy Framework is that once exceptional circumstances are identified, there isn't then a requirement to mirror the standard method as closely as possible. The requirement is to take account of demographic projections and market signals, which is obviously what ORS have done in their housing needs assessment. So there doesn't seem to me to be a reason to go back and adjust the 2014 projections when more recent data is available.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moore?
Okay, just as a follow-up to that point, it has actually been considered many times in planning appeals, that particular issue at the point that we did this. So, for example, in central Bedfordshire and in North Norfolk, we had planning appeals which considered whether, if there were issues with the 2014 projections, did you adjust those or did you go forward with a different set of projections? And it was accepted at those that you went forward with a different set of projections.
I think I've actually been one of the inspectors in one of those planning appeals in central Bedfordshire. Yeah. I'm not sure I came down anywhere on which method was used in the end for that one. But anyway, is there anything from any of the other participants on that point?
May I chime in, Inspector?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, so I think that our position, our kind of reading of the council's evidence is essentially that the council have identified a specific issue with the 2014 base projections, which is fine. I mean, planning practice guidance doesn't necessarily require local authorities to kind of test the robustness of the 2014 base projections. They don't have to, but in this case, the council have chosen to look at the robustness of them, and they've made it quite clear in the housing need assessment that the 2014 base projections are a significant underestimate of need because they are based on past trends which underestimate migration. I think
Mr. Moore will kind of accept that that's what his Appendix A shows. And given that the council have identified a very specific issue for which the council is able to kind of correct or adjust that figure, we have to kind of ask why kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's kind of no logic in my mind to identify a specific issue with one part of the standard method and then to essentially depart from the whole thing. So I know that Mr. Moore has taken you through the various uplifts that ORS have then applied to the 2018 base starting point, which are very kind of, you know, there are lots of adjustments in there, but they're all relatively small in terms of their number. If you look at the scale of, for example, the affordability uplift, which is stage 2 of the standard method, you can see in EVO 13, which is the housing background paper addendum, that the adjustment factor in Reading for stage 2 is, so that's in table 3.2, the adjustment factor is basically 21.5% on top of the baseline. And then it's on top of that that you then apply a further 35% uplift. So for all the discussion that, you know, Mr. Moore said that they've adopted a later projection, which has resulted in a lower starting point, but they've adopted kind of more in the way of the number of uplifts. All of those are kind of relatively small in the context that if you just went back to the standard method for stage 2, you would have applied effectively a 22% uplift to whatever your starting point was, and then you would have applied a further 35% uplift. And just very briefly on the point about using more recent projections, when the standard method was brought into the NPPF in 2018, I'm sure Mr. Moore and others at the council will be aware that shortly after that, ONS published 2016 base projections, which were much lower. The government came out with a consultation that essentially said that those lower projections were not in line with its aspirations to deliver 300,000 homes. And as such, the PPG was updated to essentially say that any method that relied on, I'm just trying to find the specific wording, just bear with me.
Thank you.
Sorry, so it's para 2A005 of the PPG that asks why are the 2014 base projections used as the baseline. It says they provide stability for planning purposes, ensure that historic underdelivery and declining affordability are reflected and consistent with the government's objective of boosting housing supply. And then it goes on at para 15 to say that any method which relies on using household projections more recently published than the 2014 projections will not be considered to be following the standard method as set out in para 60 of the framework. As explained above, it's not considered that these projections provide an appropriate basis for use in the standard method. So again, I think that demonstrates that the sort of justification of departing from the 2014 base projections and then going down a completely different route using more recent projections is just simply not one that has been envisaged in the NPPF or in the PPG. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore and Mr. Warringham?
In terms of the final outputs here, I think it's worth remembering that we came back to the jobs requirement. So whereas there is a demographic modelling underneath this, the final number is actually driven by the jobs factor. And therefore, there is a very significant uplift beyond the uplifts envisaged within the standard method from the demographic starting point to the final number, driven by the jobs and workers number, which gets you to a higher factor. Don't know if Mr. Warren wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, just to, I guess, to follow up on that. The jobs total is a top up to bring you to whatever the level is that allows us to provide sufficient homes to meet the jobs growth. It's not a kind of that we would add that number to whatever figure is emerging from demographics and market signals. It's whatever is needed to get to that number, which is 735. So you could have different demographic projections, which gets you to a different number, but as long as the output of that and the market signals is still under 735, that's the number you come to at the end of the day, because that's the number that's needed to support the level of jobs. That's my understanding of it, Nigel, I think.
Yeah, that's broadly correct. It's how many workers do we need to meet the jobs? How many workers equals how many people? The number of people within this, we come back to the number of 735. So applying a further uplift on top of this, for example, would take you well away from balancing jobs and workers. There would then be too many workers within the population to balance against the number of jobs that were projected for Reading.
And if I could, sorry, add to another point that was made, we would agree that the use of the 2018 projections isn't the standard method. This isn't the standard method that we're operating.
Yeah.
We demonstrate the exceptional circumstances and then we use an alternative method. So we're not pretending that this is the standard method. As I kind of already said, the NPPF does make stipulations about what we need to do in those alternative methods. So it's got the opportunity there to say you must use the 2014 household projections if it wanted to, or you must mirror the standard method as closely as you want, as you can if it wanted to. But it doesn't say that. It says we need to take account of demographic projections and market signals, and that's what the alternative method does.
Thank you. Ms. Haynes, did you want to come back on what you've heard?
I was just going to raise a very brief kind of query, which is I'm not clear within the so within the standard method, we obviously have demographic change accounted for in the baseline, and then we have market signals accounted for in the affordability uplift, and then in the case of Reading, we have the cities and urban centres uplift as well, which is a separate kind of policy on requirement to focus development in urban areas. I'm not really clear within the council's method. I know that they've said that Mr. Moore has said that the 735 balances the number of jobs and homes insofar as providing enough workers, but I'm not clear exactly within that where you're getting the equivalent market signals uplift, which in the case of the standard method, as I've pointed to earlier, is that kind of 22% affordability uplift. Now that's not related to the number of people, that's simply to add homes on top of what is kind of otherwise needed in order to kind of increase housing supply, increase choice, improve affordability and improve prices. I'm not quite clear where that degree of change is kind of replicated in the council's method.
Mr. Moore?
Yeah, we have concealed households, we have suppressed household formation, and we have vacancy rate all included within that methodology. All of those are additions to the household projections. So that uplift, which was applied within the standard method and is still applied within the standard method in a different form in the new method, takes account of vacancy rate, for example. The vacancy rate does not appear in the standard method anywhere else. So for every local authority, it is considering that, as well as concealed households, as well as suppressed household formation. And it's also an uplift to bring in more people if it's necessary to balance jobs and workers, but then sometimes you have to go higher than that for some local authorities. So there is two elements of uplift in this. One element is the households or vacant dwellings which need to be counted within Reading, which have not been counted elsewhere, which are the concealed suppressed households, the vacant dwellings. There's also a further uplift, which is picking up the jobs and workers balance issue in there. So there is not the 35% uplift has been raised, but if you were applying the 35% uplift, you'll be applying it on top of the demographic projections. That would essentially just replace the jobs and workers uplift, because that would then be double counting if we put both of those uplifts in there.
Mr. Warham, did you want to add anything to Mr. Moore?
No, I don't want to add anything to
Okay, thank you. Ms. Haynes, does that clarify that sufficiently, or do you have any more points? And then I'll come to Mr. Behrend.
Yeah, just in response to what Mr. Moore has just explained, and this idea that if you applied the kind of 35% uplift, you'd get to the same outcome. I think that's sort of comparing apples with pears, because I think if you were to take the 2014 based projections, make the kind of UPC adjustments that are described in the RS housing need assessment, and then go back to the standard method in terms of this 21.5% affordability uplift on stage 2, and then 35% as part of the affordability, the cities and urban centres uplift, you wouldn't get to 735. You would get to a number much higher than that. So I think it's just important to make sure that we're comparing the same things here when we're talking about uplifts achieving the same things. And I would also query to Mr. Moore what the uplifts that are described in terms of concealed households. and vacancy, as a percentage of the overall figure, what do those equate to, and are those equivalent to the uplifts that exist within the standard method?
Mr. Moore? I think you're on mute, Mr. Moore.
Very quickly trying to do a piece of maths there, but they add up in total to 148 dwellings per annum, which is more than the uplift which was proposed by the standard method. That is concealed vacancies, suppressed households, and communally housed is also not included anywhere within the standard method, but those people who live in communally housed accommodation still exist and still needs to be counted somewhere. So yes, they do add up to a very significant uplift, which is actually higher than is proposed, I think, within the standard method.
Thank you. Unless there's anything further, Mr. Warringham.
I'm probably going to keep coming back to the same point here, which is that if you take the 2014 projections, do a UPC adjustment, and then carry on with the standard method, that's still not the standard method. That still needs exceptional circumstances. And once you've demonstrated exceptional circumstances, you're at the point of, you know, what is your alternative methodology? What does the NPPF say? Can you come up with a methodology that is more locally specific, more actual reflection of local needs than a wide methodology which is applied to the whole country? So I think that's what we've done, and the justification for what we've done.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Behrend.
Thank you, Mark. It's a very, very similar point to the point Ms. Haynes just made in terms of the urban uplift and the uplift with regard to jobs target. They are separate, and I think what the council have done and Mr. Moore have done is look at what the demographic projections are and look at what is needed in terms of the economy, in terms of jobs growth. And that is one calculation. Almost that is where we're getting to in terms of the base standard method in terms of addressing that. And then it's on additional point, and its additional point within the standard method is then the 35% uplift in terms of urban centres. And that isn't an uplift in terms of demography. It's not a demographic change. It is a policy on change uplift to ensure that there's more development going into those urban areas, that there is more in those areas where you can deliver that development more densely. And I think you've got to take them separately. You can't consider the urban uplift in the same context as the uplift for demographic, or indeed an uplift in terms of if it was for affordability. Indeed, if you look at the standard method, and I know Mr. Warringham said that the standard method is if there's exceptional circumstances, you discard the standard method and you bring forward your own method. But I don't think you necessarily have. You might discard the elements in terms of getting to that base number, but the urban uplift, I would suggest, is the separate element. The council have come up with the 735 as being the figure that they're required in terms of the demography, and that's including jobs. Whereas the urban uplift is a separate thing, saying, well, actually, we want to see development. The government wants to see more development coming forward within those urban areas, and therefore that is an additional stage that the council have chosen to ignore within their assessment. And so I do think they're very different, and I don't think you can sort of just replace one with the other. I don't think that's how the standard method would apply and how the urban uplift is meant to be applied in this circumstance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Behrend. Mr. Warringham or Mr. Moore?
So I'll take it. That's right. It's still the case that if we, for example, take the 735, that has a balance of the number of people with the number of workers. If you add 35% more, then who is going to live in those dwellings? We've already considered suppressed household formation, taken formation rates back to 2001. We've adjusted that. We've dealt with concealed households. We've dealt with people in communal housing. So what that 35% means is that you're going to be delivering just more homes. More homes equals more people equals more workers. So you start to get to the balance of jobs and workers in a different manner. So we would not be applying the 35% uplift on top of the jobs and workers uplift. Instead, we would consider those two things to basically be, in this case, heading in the same direction. They will get you to almost exactly the same point. If you just took our demographic growth and applied 35% uplift to it, you don't get 730, I believe you get 760, for example, and that would just be with a 35% uplift on top of it, but without the jobs and workers uplift. But that would still be bringing the same people in to fill the same jobs. And this is a debate that has ran probably since 2012, effectively, as to whether uplifts within, at the time, objectively assessed need, now the standard method numbers, are they cumulative? Are they or do they sort of, does one uplift address a number of issues? And in this case, if you're adding a city's uplift, you wouldn't be adding the jobs uplift. But we added the jobs uplift to get the balance between those two. And they get you to almost the same point.
Mr. Barron, Mr. Warringham first, and then Mr. Barron.
I'm going to sound like a stuck record. I really am. But when the NPPF talks about the standard method, the urban uplift, it is in the context of it being a part of the standard method. And once again, it is entirely, if it wanted it to be applied to any alternative method, it could be absolutely said in that part of the NPPF, but it doesn't say that. It says the standard method incorporates this uplift. Now, more generally, I think we would agree that Reading is in a position to deliver a good number of homes. It's an accessible location, which is why we're seeking to deliver more than the 735 and deliver what we believe our capacity to be, because we do agree Reading should make a contribution towards meeting the housing needs of the area, the country, whatever it is. So that's why we're seeking to exceed that figure in our provision.
Thank you. Anything further from Mr. Barron or from any of the other participants on that point? Mr. Barron.
It's just that Mr. Moore keeps referring back to when we did objective assessments of needs, but we've moved on from the objective assessments of needs. We're now in a situation where we're looking at the standard method, and we are looking at the urban uplift, which was used as a method of focusing development into urban areas, and used as an approach to ensure that the overarching target of 300,000 homes per annum would be addressed. So it's recognise where Mr. Moore is coming from in terms of where the uplift and what uplifts can be applied, and there is an important need to ensure that there is sufficient growth to support those the jobs growth in an area. But that urban uplift is a separate element. It wasn't there when we were doing objectively assessed needs. We aren't doing objectively assessed needs, recognising Mr. Moore has basically used the approach that we did within that was often used in terms of objectively assessed need. But I think we do have to move forward and take account of planning practice guidance as it's presented now, and that includes an urban uplift. And I think that consideration is an important one and just can't be dismissed, as Mr. Warringham says, oh, PPG could have said this. Well, it doesn't, but it's still important to recognise that Reading was within that list, list of 20 towns and cities that should be applying that uplift, and it should be a key factor. As Mr. Warren points out, actually they've got to the to 825. They've looked to maximise, and I think that's welcomed. And I think that I believe that's the requirement they're looking for. So, to a certain extent, some of this argument seems to be a bit moot in terms of that. But I do think it's the urban uplift is there. It should have been taken into account and can't just be dismissed as the council are doing in their calculation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from the council in response to Mr. Barron?
Just one very quick point. Within the standard method, it talks about local growth strategies or other factors which could see the need being higher, but it doesn't actually talk about doing jobs and workers balance, whereas we have done jobs and workers balance here. We wouldn't be applying that within the standard method, so it would be applying to the demographic growth. And I would agree completely with Mr. Barron that much of this discussion may well be moot, because the standard method at the point of submission was actually below the amount of housing that's been set aside by the council anyway. But in terms of what would be the need for Reading if you were seeking to meet Reading's need within the balance of jobs and workers, the answer we came to was 735. That is the need that would be required to meet all local needs effectively. And any higher number is reaching out and providing for other needs. I'll let Mr. Warren finish on behalf of the council if he wants to. Yeah.
Mr. Warringham.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna argue around. You know, I think we've all made our points now fairly clear. So it's not about that, but it is the point about the fact that the plan does now meet what the standard method would have been at the point of submission. So if we would stand by the calculations of need that Mr. Moore's made. But if you were minded that should be a main modification, it would be a relative, and I think the HPF make this point in the hearing statement, it'd be a relatively straightforward alteration to the supporting text of policy H1.
Thank you. Okay. Anything further on that particular point that we've just discussed from any of the other participants?
If I may, Inspector,
yeah.
Are we going to come back to the specific points that the council make in its background paper about the 35% uplift and why it's not applicable? Because if we are, then I'll come back to that later.
Yes, I was going to move on to that now.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just in terms of that point of the cities and urban centres uplift, these are just additional questions over and above what I asked in my matters, issues and questions. So when the government brought forward the cities and urban centres uplift, Mr. Warringham, was that done in the knowledge that Reading was the smallest area within that cities and urban centres uplift by both area and population outside London to be subject to the uplift?
I don't know what they knew when they did it. We hadn't done those calculations at the time either when it was brought in.
It might assist, Inspector, just by reference to the PPG. So the PPG, I'm just checking the date now. So the version from December of 2020 in paragraph, so I'm just reaching the bottom. 28004 actually lists under step 4 the 20 authorities that are subject to the uplift, and at the time the PPG was published, Reading was in that list, so it is explicitly set out in the PPG.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Thank you. But just as a follow-up to that, Mr. Warren, I appreciate you hadn't done the calculations at the time, but has anything changed in terms of the boundaries of the borough at all since the uplift was introduced?
No. So we would have always known. We always knew we were in the 20 authorities. I think we're about number 17 in terms of size of urban area, something like that. But kind of work on comparing to other authorities in terms of geographical area and size, which is what the housing provision background paper does. That wasn't done at the time. So, but there have been no changes in circumstances in terms of boundaries since the urban uplift was brought in 2020. No. So
we've already discussed to some extent what the cities and urban centres uplift was based on, i.e. that, you know, the aim to deliver 300,000 homes, etc. So presumably, you've said you're number 17 out of 20. Presumably one location would have to be the smallest in terms of area or population. It's simply the nature of the beast, so to speak, that there's going to be a largest one, there's going to be a smallest one.
Yes, no, absolutely agreed with that, but it's the extent to which we are the smallest in both area and population, which is about, I don't want to quote figures off the top of my head, but I think it's around 30% smaller. And the figures are in our are in that background paper.
Yeah.
So it's not that we are the smallest; it's we're the smallest to that extent. We are much smaller than the other authorities.
Thank you. And does anybody else want to come in on this particular point at all? Mr. Berendt.
Sorry, Mr. Berendt's got his hand up. I'll mute.
Mr. Berendt, then Ms. Streets, then Ms. Haynes. Mr. Berendt, your sound's off.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was just going to say let Miss Haynes go, but I really don't have anything more to add other than PPG is clear in terms of that it is within that list of 20. Consideration could have been given to various other elements within that list, but it was chosen not to. So I don't believe there is a justification really for moving away from that on the basis of what the council said. I recognise that there may be differences within those, and there may be different arguments in different cities as to why they shouldn't have it applied. But I think in terms of the standard method, it's very clear that it falls within this list. As you rightly said, Marmy, someone has to be at the lower down the list and at the bottom. Someone has to be number 20 or 18, and I think this just has to be an acceptance that Reading are in that list, and there is a justification to move away from it. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Ms. Street.
Yeah, and my point was very similar, really. That obviously Reading is within that list. The PPG from December 2020 did state that places can move in and out of that list as well, and obviously Reading hasn't moved out of it, so that it might be the smallest, but it is still there, and nowhere has overtaken it.
Thank you, and Ms. Haynes.
Thank you, Inspector. Yeah, so I guess my first kind of question really to Mr. Warringham, he's made the point that Reading is the smallest by, say around 30%. I mean, where is the kind of threshold for kind of acceptability in terms of how much smaller or larger Reading would need to be in order for the uplift to be acceptable? And I'd also, my second point really briefly, I'll just refer to our Reg 19 reps at para 4.17, because there's nothing in the council's background paper that actually compares what Reading's standard method figure is as a percentage of stock, which is a lot more of a useful measure. If the council is contending that this is a kind of deliverability point, which is implied in the housing background paper at para 3.13, the council seemed to suggest that it's a point about deliverability. If that were the case, then we would expect to see a comparison, for example, of how the rate of growth under the standard method compares with, for example, past rates of growth or rates of growth for other authorities in that top 20 list. But if we look at the figure for Reading as a percent of its current stock, it's 1.2% per year, which is actually bang on average when you compare it with the other authorities. So you've got, you've got rates varying from kind of 0.4% in Hull to kind of 0.9% in Liverpool. And then you've also got lots of authorities that are higher. You've got 1.3% in Southampton, you've got 1.6% in Bristol, Coventry and Manchester, and 2.6% in London. So when you actually take, setting aside the kind of absolute size of Reading and its kind of absolute area or its absolute population and all of those figures, setting all of that aside, and just looking at what is Reading's housing number as a percentage of its current stock, and then we compare that with the other areas, Reading is actually bang on average. There's nothing kind of particularly notable at all about the rate of growth when the standard method is expressed as a proportion of stock.
Thank you. Mr. Warringham and Mr. Moore, would you like to respond to all that you've heard from Mr. Berendt, Ms. Streets and Ms. Hayes?
I'm happy to respond to that. So in terms of the points made by Mr. Berendt and Ms. Streets, I'm happy to rely on what we've already put in writing and our arguments that we've made there. In terms of the point around as a percentage of dwelling stock and the rate of increase, we accept it's going to be around the same because it's the same methodology that's being applied. What we're arguing, I guess, is that the geography of Reading and the fact that we have a smaller proportion of the urban area that has put us in the list of 20 in the first place limits our options for how that is provided, because we have the kind of dense urban core of Reading, and most of our suburbs, most of our areas where we could expand Reading outwards are in adjoining authorities. So I guess that's the core of the point we've been making on this. The only other point I'd want to make on these exceptional circumstances is we very much are saying that these are secondary to the exceptional circumstances identified by ORS in the housing needs assessment, which stand, in our view, on their own. So we're not seeking to rely on these exceptional circumstances solely.
Thank you. Anything more from Mr. Barrett, Ms. Streets, or Ms. Haynes on this point? No? Okay. And just having regard to questions 2.1 through to 2.5 of my matters, issues and questions, so all in relation to the housing need situation. Has anybody got any further points they wish to raise on those questions?
None from me. Thank you, Inspector.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett shaking his head. Thank you.
None from me.
Thank you. That's great. No. Okay. Thank you. So obviously, in terms of the requirement, the council's looking at a figure of 825, which is expressed as an at least figure over the plan period to 2041. That's set out in policy H1, and that's come from the capacity work that's been done through the housing and economic land availability assessment undertaken by the council. So we've got either a figure of 735 based on the Reading housing needs assessment for need, or we've got a standard method figure of 822 based on the figure at the point of submission of the plan. If I were to ask the council, and this is to the council first of all, if I were to ask the council to follow a standard method figure of 822 for need, and the capacity was very little over that per year, so 3 additional dwellings over that per year, with a housing requirement figure of 825 annually, would they consider that there'd be a need for an early review, Mr. Warringham?
I don't think there would be a need for an early review. I think the difficulties kind of, I suppose we're talking about the extent to which that gives us a good enough buffer above whatever the standard method figure would be. We have a good supply of permissions. We have a good supply of sites coming forward right now. Our view is that the difficulty is likely to emerge towards the end of the plan period if there was going to be a difficulty in meeting a buffer over the standard method, which could then be picked up in a normal 5-year review of the plan.
Thank you. Did anybody want to pick up on that? I think that was a point that Gladman had made in their submissions.
Yeah, so we'd mentioned that an early review would be preferable on the basis that we think that the housing requirement is too low, and ultimately kind of looking at the new standard method, it is significantly higher. So we would recommend an early review to help boost the housing in Reading.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Warringham, on that?
Only that we're happy to substantiate, we're perhaps it's something I was going to leave to the end, but we've done our monitoring of housing completions for 24-25 now, which wasn't in any of the information which was submitted. So that would trigger a need to relook again at the housing trajectory. And doing that work will demonstrate our point, I think, that delivery is harder the further you go into the plan period, because a lot of those sites are going to come on earlier on. So if that would be of assistance.
And is that data publicly available as yet, or?
Only the data on completions and how last year's monitoring data is available. A new version of the housing trajectory is not yet available. No, been prioritising preparing for this at the moment.
Fair enough. Okay. Shall think on that. Anything further on that particular point? Mr. Parent.
The only point to make is obviously a requirement of 822 would mean that the council is 81% of the new standard method. So obviously that, in terms of the transition arrangements, they just come in under the wire with regard to the need to undertake an early review with regard to that point and the in terms of the transitional arrangements. However, it is very close in terms of that number, and I think some form of early review or commitment to an early review would be suitable within this context, given how close it is in terms of to that 80%. So I would suggest that some consideration be given within as the examination goes forward as to whether a review policy is necessary. Really setting out the timescale as to when the council would seek to submit a new plan for examination. I think that's important, especially given the context that Reading is a tightly constrained borough, and there needs to be clear joint working with neighbouring authorities to ensure that needs are met and continue to be met in the future. So I think that the need for an early review is clearly there, and I think it's something that would be I think a necessary addition in terms of this local plan moving forward. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Anything further from any of the participants? No? Okay. For me, in terms of my questions, that draws to a close issue 1 of matter 2. So I would like to move on to covering Gypsy Traveller and Travelling Show People. I'm aware that obviously in terms of participants, those people in the meeting don't actually have any relevant representations relating to that. But is there anything else that anybody wishes to cover before we finish this part? Ms. Streets.
Yeah, I just wanted to make some comments on the urban capacity kind of review that was done. We raised some concerns throughout our hearing statements and Reg 19 statement on kind of the robustness of that. We kind of said the HELA kind of made broad assumptions on the capacity and understand that healers do need to do that to some extent, but kind of those sites that were kind of classed as potentially developable don't necessarily have the evidence that's behind them to justify that capacity. And kind of reading through the Matter 2 statement from Reading, they identify that there has been a range identified with the allocations, which doesn't necessarily reflect the capacity. So the allocations at the minute, there's a range of 5,110 to 7,470. But if that lower number is used, there would be a shortfall. So what is the capacity figure? If those allocations all under deliver, there isn't what is that capacity? So how certain can the council be that there is that is the capacity based on those broad assumptions within the HELA, when the allocations themselves aren't necessarily reflecting that?
Thank you. And we'll go on to discuss specific allocations in due course, and we'll also be discussing the densities and pattern book in due course, hopefully. But in the meantime, Mr. Warringham or colleagues, are you able to respond on the Streets point?
Yes. So I'd raised my hand as well, and it was kind of the points raised by Gladman that I wanted to talk about before we moved on to the next issue. We do identify potentially developable sites in the HELA, and that is part of capacity. I think Gladman's statement, I think, refers back to their Reg 19 submission, which provides a lot more detail on what they've done. But I don't it doesn't provide the full methodology of the kind of adjustment that Reg 19 statement makes. What I think has happened is that they've discounted any site which has an in-use business on it, because it's much more than the potentially developable sites that have been taken out. And that's another point that is made in that statement. And you know, the reality is that sites containing in-use businesses are a constant source of supply for Reading. It's not at all unusual for a site to come forward that had a business on it a couple of years ago that was operating, and that is just the reality of how development in Reading works. We have very few sites that sit vacant for years. It just doesn't happen very much here. So we do need to factor that into the capacity somehow, and that's the reason why we have used these variance figures, which try to put a number on that level of uncertainty. So you'll have seen in the HELA that those numbers are quite large. It's 36 and 42% discount, depending on whether or not you're in the town centre. And the reason is because these allocations have been prepared on the same basis as previous allocations in previous years, in which we also would have put in potentially developable sites where there was a level of uncertainty, where we hadn't necessarily had a commitment from the landowner. So that's the way previous allocations have also been prepared. So we've measured how those have come forward, and we think that that's an applicable, the only way we can really think of to measure that level of uncertainty. So the level of capacity does include those variance rates to take account of issues of uncertainty like that. There is another point made by Gladman that Ms. Haynes didn't mention now, but it's about past rates of delivery. And I just wanted to clear it up, because you would have heard from us in our opening statement yesterday that we have a good rates of delivery, that we generally deliver our housing numbers. And you will have seen in Gladman's Reg 19 response that we very rarely deliver our housing numbers. So just to kind of clear that point up, I think Gladman's response is using the ONS published data on house building, which is from Building Regulations Returns. That significantly underestimates our level of delivery, because it excludes changes of use and conversions, which are a big part of supply in Reading, and the ONS website itself advises that it's only a partial view of housing delivery, and instead there is another data set which is based on the local authorities' self-reporting, which is what our figures are based on, which is more complete. So that's why there's a difference between what different parties are saying, and based on our own reporting, which feeds into the housing delivery test, we generally do pretty well on meeting our housing targets.
Thank you. Ms. Streets, did you have anything further you wanted to add on that point?
Apologies, I was just bringing up our delivery table just to confirm what we included, but 1 second.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the figures do correspond exactly to the ONS data set. So I think that's what.
Yeah, I believe that's where we have taken them from. Yeah, I don't have any further points.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything further on this issue before we move on?
Nothing from me, Inspector.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haynes.
Not from me. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, nothing from me.
Okay, thank you. So we're now at 10:39. Is it worth taking a 10-minute break? And then obviously I understand if some participants wouldn't wish to stay for the latter part, you're obviously very welcome to, but you would simply be observing, given that you don't have relevant representations on gypsy travellers and travelling show people. So shall we adjourn until 10:50? Pretty okay with that? Ms. Burr?
Hi, if I could please just remind everyone again to please not end the event or close the window. So to leave as an individual, you just hit on the little red phone because it interrupts with our transcription. And if you're staying until after the break, if you could please just turn off your camera and mute your microphone. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much everybody for your participation so far this morning. It's much appreciated, and the hearing is adjourned until 10:50. Thank you very much. Good morning. The time is 10:50 and the hearing is resumed, and it's a compact and bijou hearing now with just the four of us in here, but it's recorded for posterity in case anybody wishes to rewatch. Okay, so we're moving on to issue 2, which is the LPPU positively prepared, justified, effective and consistent with national policy and guidance with regard to provision for gypsies, travellers and travelling show people? And I've already asked a number of questions about the situation for gypsies, travellers and travelling show people in Reading, and thank you very much for the information that you've provided. Can we just turn to the planning policy for travellers sites, if you have it to hand, please?
I'm opening it now. Just before we do, it's not on our evidence list. So do you want this to be added to the
Given it's a national policy document, it doesn't have to be, but if you want to, that's fine.
Okay.
And so this is the December 2024 version, because my understanding is these transitional arrangements that were put in place for the framework don't necessarily apply to the planning policy for travellers sites. But having said that, the policy situation here in terms of supply is extremely similar, if not identical, to that in the previous planning policy for travellers site, in terms of the expectation that you should identify and update annually, etc., etc. So just looking at paragraph 10 of the planning policy for travellers sites. So that talks about, firstly, the need to identify and update annually supply of specific deliverable sites, and that's about 5-year supply. And then we've got identifying a supply of specific deliverable sites or broad locations for growth for years 6 to 10 and years 11 to 15 where possible. So just in terms of where we are now with the LPPU at examination, what's the situation of the council in terms of being able to meet the requirements of 10A and 10B in respect of plan making?
The situation is that we're not able to meet either of those requirements. We don't have any sites that would count towards a 5-year supply, either permissions or allocations, or towards the supply in the later part of the plan period.
And just in terms
of that's for permanent pitches.
For permanent pitches,
yeah, which is the main issue.
Yeah. And in terms of transit, my understanding is that there was a permission that was granted. Do you want to take me through that situation? That was Island Road.
That's the site at Island Road. Yeah, permission was granted for a transit site with 7 pitches, which more than meets the need of 5 pitches that are identified in the previous Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment, or the most recent Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment. That permission is still extant, hasn't been implemented, and at this stage I don't believe the council has intentions to implement it due to complications with the site, which kind of illustrates the point. Even the sites we found are very difficult.
And what are the complications with that particular site?
Around flood risk, technical
flood risk
matters around flood risk, yeah.
So just in terms of, you had the 2017 Gypsy and Traveller assessment, which found, and that was for the plan period running to 2036.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, for the 2019 plan, and that resulted in a criteria-based policy that was in the 2019 plan. So my understanding of what you've provided so far is that basically where you have gypsies and you've got a travelling show people site in the borough. You've got gypsies and travellers in the borough, but they are living within bricks and mortar housing as it stands.
Yes.
And then from time to time you'll get people coming in and staying on sites which are not permitted sites.
That's correct. Yeah. So we have a number of unauthorised encampments, which are primarily on our parks or on car parks and things like that.
And how regularly are they occurring, the unauthorised encampments? What are the kind of numbers?
I would need to get the latest from the relevant department. I don't have that.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm
afraid. But in terms of those bricks and mortar residents who are identified as gypsies and travellers, the 2017 assessment didn't manage to make contact with those people and understand their future needs.
That's correct. Yeah.
So it was what assumptions were taken from that in the 2017 assessment?
So that they took the number that we knew to be living in bricks and mortar, and they applied national assumptions about how many would require a pitch to that.
And that resulted in the figures that you came up with in
Correct.
the 2019 plan. So just so I understand, what work, if any, has been done since that 2017 Gypsy and Traveller assessment on the needs of gypsies and travellers and travelling show people?
Okay. I mean, there's been no further work on needs.
And because you have had no contact with the bricks and mortar residents in the past, it's impossible to know whether there's any additional household formation coming from those bricks and mortar households or any hidden households within those bricks and mortar households.
Well, the people undertaking the assessment didn't have contact. Obviously, the council has had contact in other areas of its functions, which is why we know they exist.
Yes.
I don't know whether that number has substantially changed. It hasn't, to my knowledge, but.
Okay. So if I were in a position where I was concerned about that particular situation, in that we don't have up-to-date evidence on gypsies and travellers, would you, as the council, be willing to undertake a further gypsy and traveller accommodation needs assessment?
Yes, if that was the outcome of this discussion. Whether it would be possible to do it immediately is obviously. I don't know whether you're referring to that being part of this process or a commitment to undertaking that within the plan, and then potentially a further update to the plan as a result of that assessment. Well,
there's different options, aren't there? I suppose there's one option, which is undertake a gypsy and traveller needs assessment. Obviously, that's dependent on being able to commission somebody to do that within a timely manner. And now would be the time to do it, in terms of people being less likely to be travelling in the winter. Obviously, they are bricks and mortar residents anyway, as well, which may further reduce the likelihood of them travelling. But you don't know how busy those various consultants are, and whether they'd be available to do the work quickly. That could perhaps run alongside stage 2 hearings, and there could be a brief stage 3, which could cover gypsy and travellers. Alternatively, it's whether the council commits to undertaking another document specifically on gypsies and travellers. or it's something that is part of early review of the plan because of the absence of provision.
Okay.
And I'd just like to understand the council's preferences really on that.
Okay, so there is an issue around, you know, commissioning processes and what capacity, that because there's very few consultants that do this work, but
Yes.
also there's budgetary issues here that hasn't been budgeted for in this year's budget. So I would need to. They would be complicated.
Okay.
A separate document would be potentially an option. The difficulty would be that it might end up with almost nothing in it. Because if you can't find a site, I'm not sure what the document would say that's any different to the criteria-based policy.
Exactly.
So I was going to suggest that it be a commitment to pick it up in the 5-year update of the plan, but if you were minded that would be an earlier review, then I think that would probably be the best option. An early review on. I don't know whether that would be a topic-specific early review, because this is obviously quite a discrete topic that can be done separately. So that would be my preference, I think.
Okay, thank you. I will take that. Nice. Okay, just noting it down. And I did note from the duty to cooperate commentary that there were also issues for neighbouring authorities with provision for gypsies and travellers as well, unsurprisingly, because it's a common issue across the country.
Yes, my understanding is that Wokingham are now meeting their needs in their plan, and actually a planning application is in which would deliver, I don't know, I don't think it's all of their need, but certainly deliver a good chunk of their needs close to Reading's boundaries. Yeah. I think they would be meeting their own needs now. But yeah, we need to have that conversation again.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of travelling show people, could you just take me through the current situation there in terms of travelling show people?
Yeah, so the assessment identified a need for 2 additional plots. We do have a site in Reading by the Thames, Scowers Lane, which has been in travelling show people use for many years. It's actually now vacant because they've vacated the site and it did go on the market. The alternative options for its use are very, very limited by the fact it's almost entirely in the functional floodplain. So there is a certificate of lawfulness which confirms that it is lawful to use it for travelling show people use, but I'm not really sure what else it could potentially be used for that's different to that use.
And how many? And you said there was a need for 2. And how many is that capable of accommodating if it were in use?
I believe it's 5 or 6.
Okay.
There are potentially options to extend that site that are outside the functional floodplain, but not the kind of pieces of land you could ever put forward as a discrete site, if you see what I mean, because they're just patches of lower flood risk amongst higher flood risk. But we took the view that two pitches or 2 plots, that is for travelling show people, would never really be deliverable or usable on its own in a separate location.
Yeah, because generally people have large amounts of equipment and they tend to live in groupings with that large amount of equipment.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. So do you have anything more that you want to add on gypsy, traveller and travelling show people?
I don't believe I have. Just to probably emphasise something I said yesterday, which is that we really did go to quite a lot of lengths last time around to try to find a site. It was quite quite a significant amount of work as a proportion of the overall local plan work, and we really we did come up short after a real kind of genuine assessment of our options and political weight behind it to try and find something, which is where the permission for transit use came from.
Thank you. That's helpful to understand. And just before we conclude matter 2 for the day, obviously this is the last of the stage 1 hearing sessions that we've got programmed. I did send through an action list and a document about how main modifications and consequential changes and so on would be undertaken, and just wanted to discuss those, if that's a good opportunity for the council to discuss them. So obviously,
yes, that's fine. We've received that, so that's fine.
Yeah, okay. So what my intention is with the action list, first of all, is effectively this is a document that goes back and forth between you and I in terms of what is being provided, and that's whether it's additional documentation. So yesterday we discussed the dates of meetings with the Berkshire Heads of Planning and the Development Plans Group under the duty to cooperate. So it would be helpful to me to have information on those dates. I appreciate there probably won't be minutes available for those because they're generally not minuted, which Chatham House rules, but dates would be helpful. So it's that kind of matter. It's also if we've discussed a main modification and the council needs to put a main modification into the schedule, then it's about referring to that and making sure that's going backwards and forwards. And effectively the action list consists of it numbers the action, it says whether it's making a main modification or not, it refers to what matter it refers to, and then it says something alongside that saying provide inspector with dates, and then it says who's involved in that. So for example, I've also asked for clarity on the statement of common ground with National Highways, so that would be both the council and National Highways that's involved in that, and then I would expect to see the date on which it's gone to me and that action has been completed, because what we'll end up with is a large list of actions through the whole process, and it's just helpful to be able to keep track for both of our benefits on where things are. Is there anything that you wanted to ask about the action list per se, Mr. Warringham?
Just about the mechanics of it, I suppose. So it's a document we have between us. It's not something that we need to publish at this point, maybe at the end of the process when all the actions are kind of agreed and ticked off, or is it something you want to see interim versions of published?
It would be helpful after each stage of hearings to have interim versions published, just so that everybody can understand and it's all clear and above board what is occurring in terms of the council's actions and my requests.
Okay.
So it may be that as a result of today's hearing, I add actions to that, and then we can put that up on the website at that point. So anything further on the action list?
No, I think that's pretty clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that remains a Word document throughout. Obviously, it goes up on the website as a PDF, but that's just to capture it at a moment in time. And then there was the other Word document which I sent through, which was requirements for modifications and consequential changes. So we've essentially got 3 sets of 3 documents here. So you've got the main modifications, which is effectively a large table, and it becomes increasingly unwieldy and misbehaves in Word, but we'll do the best we can. Then you've got any additional modifications, which are obviously the responsibility of the council. The only issue in terms of my understanding of additional modifications is, has something been put forward as an additional modification, which is actually a main? So really that's my only interest in additional modifications. And otherwise it's for the council to decide what they wish to do with regard to typos and updated documents and things like that. And then we've got consequential changes to the policies map. Historically, the policies map hasn't officially been something that the inspector is examining, although that changes through the LURA, I understand. But effectively, where there is a change in the geographic representation of something as a result of a main modification, or because an error was established in terms of mapping, so whether the inset matches the main map and so on, then that would be something that would go in the consequential changes. And because this is a review and it's slightly more complicated as a main modifications process than a standard plan. So if it was a standard local plan where the entirety was new and there were no track changes involved, then we'd just be doing strike through and underline in the same colour text as the main plan, so in black text. However, what we've got here is a plan LPA LP003B, which has track changes in it. So the colours need to differentiate the difference between something that was in the 2019 adopted plan, something that is in the submission plan, so is effectively in red with either underlining or strike through, and something that is now proposed through the main modifications. And so I'm suggesting, it's not perfect, but I'm suggesting that you then introduce another colour of text, which is either blue text for new text or blue text strike through, where something else has been removed by the main modification. And I have to say, it does mess with your head a little bit when you're doing the main modifications. But you may already have realised that. And I have tried on previous plans to try and find a more accessible route than this, which is more readable, particularly if you're trying to read the main modifications and you have a particular disability. This can be very difficult to understand, and I haven't found a perfect tool for doing this. So if you have any additional ideas, you know, feel free, because we can all learn.
Okay, I was going to suggest that we might talk to our communications people about the issue of colour blindness, because I know that's an issue that often comes up, and see if we can find the right colours to match that. Yeah,
and what I've also experienced before is where somebody does have difficulty, either visual impairment difficulties, then it may be the case that actually it's something that you have to address specifically at the time that that person asks for the information. So it's perhaps for the officer to provide effectively the track changes all accepted, so that that person can see what it can read through exactly what the text would end up looking like, or whether it's about somebody specifically engaging with them and going through with them. This is what the main modification proposes. This is the difference it would make. But it's kind of dependent to some extent on what the disability is that you're dealing with, in terms of making reasonable adjustments for that. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but if you wish to talk to your comms people about any alternatives, that would be great.
Okay.
And absolutely happy to hear from you on that. In the meantime, if you start producing a table, it will help you in the long run, because you're just then updating that table. It's helpful if it's landscape, it's helpful if it's A3, because certainly when you're trying to read a lot of text, it's helpful when you can see it all on one line in A3. And it's also helpful if you have the header rows across the pages. So if anybody reading it can understand which part of the plan it is, what's happening, and so on. And that's really it from my perspective. So it's really over to you if you had any particular questions on how we progress that.
No, I don't believe I have any other questions unless Sarah's got anything that's not clear. No.
Okay.
No, we've
Thank
obviously
you.
received the email about, you know, next stages and so on. So we'll have a look at that and come back on dates and the question around virtual in person.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I don't have a specific preference for either. It is completely down to the council regarding virtual or in person and your particular circumstances. If you want to continue virtually, the only thing I would say from what we've experienced so far, some things will happen because the individual's teams is not working particularly well that day, and that we experienced that this morning, and that's not something that's within the council's control. Completely get that. If you can investigate a little bit further the hands up function, that would be really helpful to me, because as you'll have noticed, I'm looking down and around at various different documents and scribbling as well, and then I look up and I suddenly see hands then, and it's much easier to see the little yellow hand than it is to see people's hands in a little tiny box. So I'm just aware, if we get to stage 2 hearings, and particularly for hearings where there's a lot more public interest in certain sessions, if we're doing it virtually, I could be dealing with a larger number of people. So just helpful to think about that. But I'll be guided by you on whether it's virtual or in person. And then as far as the further dates are concerned, obviously it's gone very quickly in terms of stage 1. We had a day each allowed for them, and they've been much shorter sessions. With the with some of the matters, I can envisage that probably we could fit a number of matters into a day. And I'm obviously happy to discuss that with you via Jane as the programme officer, as to how that timetable might work best. So, for example, doing retail, leisure, transport, other uses all in one day, but then perhaps having a fair bit longer for sites where we might have more people turn out. But we can cross that bridge when we come to it. In terms of the 2 weeks I've suggested, they are 2 weeks that I'm available. I thought it was probably the earliest point we possibly could do hearings, just in terms of the lead-in time and the Christmas holidays for, both yourselves in terms of taking leave, but also for the participants in terms of not being in the office as well. And it may be, I don't think we'd need the whole 2 weeks, but it's a kind of holding that time for the moment.
Okay.
I have drafted stage 2 questions. So what I will look to do now is reflect on what you've told me and what the other participants have talked about over the last 2 days. And I will look to write out to you as a conclusion to stage 1, and then potentially also issue my stage 2 hearing questions. But it would be helpful to understand the timings before I do issue those hearing questions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So
yeah,
if you could come back to me as soon as possible on the timings, that would be really great.
Yeah, we should be able to come back to you this week.
That would be really helpful. Thank you, Mr. Warren. Okay, so is there anything else that you wish to raise with me before we conclude for the day and for this stage?
There isn't. No, thank you.
No. Okay. Well, thank you very much, all of you. I appreciate all of you work making this happen. And so the hearing is now adjourned until potentially stage 2 of the examination, and I'll be in contact in due course with you regarding the next steps, Mr. Warren.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.